On Halloween night, in a quiet suburban town, 13-year-old Lilia Sparks was out in her gorilla costume. It was a gorilla costume that had been her mother's back in her 90s riot girl phase, and it was under promise of being scalped alive that her mother made her promise to bring the gorilla suit back in one piece. Something was hanging in the Halloween air that night, the legend of Deborah Ramirez, the girl that had vanished 3 years prior. Rumors were that Deborah's uncle had taken her to Venezuela, back to her real father. He'd switched costumes around to pull off this task. It was whispered that she returns once every year to any children that switch their mask with other children to make fun of her on Halloween night. Lilia had switched mask with one of the boys she had a crush on. She hadn't wanted to do so, but he wanted her gorilla mask, so she reluctantly took his ghost face mask. Dusk was falling on the night when Lilia received an invitation hidden inside her candy bag, a hand-drawn map leading her to the abandoned house at the end of Black Oak Street, the one all the locals avoid. She threw it down, realizing someone was playing pranks. Curiosity crystallized in her an hour later and made her to approach the dilapidated house on Black Oak Street. All the stories of the lawn, scattered in treasures of candy left behind by past trick-or-treaters, lured her Mengmuks. It was town custom to throw one piece of your candy in the yard to appease the evil spirits that lived there. So it had to be true, she thought. Lilia stepped down the winding path marked on the map. It seemed as if creatures lurked just beyond her vision. As she reached the decrepit house shrouded in fog, she started to turn back, but then out from the shed popped none other than Deborah Ramirez, who still had her hair in the same style of braids Lilia had remembered. It's you," Lilia asked, confused. What are you doing here?" "We are preparing for the festivities," Deborah said in whispered tones. Her accent had become British. "Why do you sound like you're from London now?" Lilia asked, proud to show off her ear for international dialects. "We need to unearth a centuries-old scarecrow buried out back," Deborah said, pointing at field towards the cemetery full of antiquated headstones. "If we don't retrieve that totem, we will no longer be able to ward off evil spirits." Lilia was confused by the urgency of Deborah's speech and why Deborah seemed possessed by the same demons she was begging her to ward off. "What evil spirits are you talking about, Deborah?" Beneath the silver glow of a harvest moon, Deborah grabbed Lilia's hand and they walked into the enchanted field that lay on the outskirts of their town. It was Halloween night, a time when mischief collided with myth under the guise of childish glee. "Are we really going to do this?" Lilia's voice trembled as they reached the center of the field, which was overgrown with brush and cloaked in an otherworldly mist. "I don't understand why you need me to do this," Lilia said in plea. "Only if you believe in magic," Deborah whispered, her eyes gleaming like black obsidian. She held the Ouija board she had snatched from the rickety attic of her grandmother's house. "They say this scarecrow is haunted. We should try to communicate with the dead instead." "Would you please tell me, did you not get taken by your uncle?" Lilia asked. But Deborah seemed bothered that Lilia had broken the spell she had started, and she glanced at the cemetery, pointing at it as where she wanted them to go. Once they arrived, shadows danced behind the weathered gravestones, an unsettling sigh rustling through the air as if the spirits within were just as curious about their presence. "We could invite something here that we can't control," Deborah suggested, her eyes gleaming like a happy child's. Before they could consider turning back, Deborah set the board on the ground. The wind howled as if warning them. Each girl placed a hand on the planchette, breaths mingling with the cool night air. They always had been good friends. Here they were back together. "They'll just get her to tell me where she's been later, when we get out of this," Lilia thought to herself and ignored her inner intuition. Both girls shivered, chilled by the mist swirling around them. "Is anyone there?" Lilia asked, voice barely above a whisper. The planchette jerked, sliding ominously toward yes. Before either of them could process the movement, a chilling gust blew through the field, sending the planchette upwards. Lilia's violet eyes turned even paler. "Maybe we should stop. This isn't a joke anymore." "Afraid are you, Lilia? Just like always, huh?" Deborah shot back, tongue still sharp as the blade Lilia remembered. "Come on, don't you want to unearth some real phantoms? Prove that you aren't scared?" In a moment of defiance, Lilia leaned into the board. What do you want? To their horror, the board's response was swift. In frantic motions, it spelled out, YOU. A silence engulfed both their voices, so thick it felt suffocating. Oh my God, Deborah said, grabbing Lilia's hand. What have we done? We need to leave, Lilia urged her, picking up the Ouija board, but the ground began to tremble below them. Let's reverse it. Let's focus and reverse it, Deborah shouted. We can make this stop. My uncle taught me. With shaky hands, Lilia reluctantly returned the board to the ground. What must we do? She stammered to the board. The planchette flew across the board, slashing letters like an arrow. SACRIFICE. What does that even mean? Lilia cried. We're not sacrificing anything. But Lilia could feel the bones now, slithering, grasping at her ankles, urging her down into the hungry earth. Get off me! She screamed as she struggled, clawing at the bones, but their skeleton hands only tightened. Deborah lunged to help her, but one by one, both were now ensnared. The relentless thrust of the roots twisted them deeper into the soil. Please, do something! Lilia's voice grew faint as she got pulled into the earth. What do we have to give? Deborah hollered at the board, desperate, and placed her hands on the planchette. YOU. The word hung heavy in the air. In that moment, realization washed over her. They had not just awakened the spirits, they had walked into it with a vengeance. The ground trembled, announcing its intention. Leave us alone, Deborah begged of them. The magic field stood silent again. The board lay discarded. Across the mist was coming 2 candles glowing. What are you girls doing out here? Deborah's grandmother and uncle's face came into the light. We came to check on you after the earthquake. We were just doing girl stuff, Deborah offered them. I thought we asked you not to see any of the kids. We were here only for a few hours to collect some business from Grandma's house. You were supposed to stay put in your bed, her uncle said to her, looking as if he understood her needs. It's Lilia. I just needed to see her. Please forgive me. She won't tell anyone, will you? Deborah asked Lilia, gesturing her to answer what she wanted. It was at that time that Lilia woke up face first by the shed of the haunted house of Black Oak Street and realized nobody was there. She picked up a couple pieces of candy from the ground and walked the perimeter of the old wrought iron fence that held in the haunted house. It didn't seem like anyone had been there in days. Lilia could barely recall if she really saw Deborah. It all felt like a dream. She checked the shed one more time for her and saw the root in the yard that she had tripped on. She must have passed out when she fell. She looked down and saw a small rip in the knee of her mom's gorilla costume. She ran her hand over it. I better be going, she said quaintly to any lingering spirits. She'd have to figure out how to tell her mom about trading her mask, the knee, and the map. The map? Where was the map? Moving into a new house after my divorce felt like hitting the reset button. The chaos of my old life, endless arguments, lawyers, long days spent alone, was left behind in the city. Rosewood Lane, with its neat houses, perfectly trimmed lawns, and quiet streets, felt like the kind of place where life was orderly, predictable. I needed that. The day I moved in, the sun was shining, and I was surrounded by moving boxes when the neighbors started to show up. Carol from across the street brought a pie, the elderly Suttons came with a potted plant, and Greg, a few doors down, invited me to a barbecue he was hosting. It was suburban life at its finest, everyone eager to welcome the new guy. A bit much, but after months of isolation, it was refreshing. Everyone greeted me, except for the people in the house next door. Their place stood out, 2 stories like mine but older, with peeling paint and an overgrown lawn that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Their windows were always dark, even in the middle of the day, with the curtains drawn tight. No flowers, no welcome mat, nothing. In all the time I'd spent unpacking, I hadn't seen a single person come in or out. At Greg's barbecue a few days later, I asked about them. Oh, them? Greg said, scratching his chin. Yeah, they're kind of strange. Don't see 'em much. His wife, Marina, chimed in. We've lived here 5 years, and I've only seen them twice. They just keep to themselves. You probably won't even know they're there. The conversation moved on. I couldn't stop thinking about that house. Everyone acted like it was no big deal, just some reclusive neighbors. Every time I looked over at it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I tried to forget about it. People have their quirks, right? A few nights later, I heard something strange. I had the windows open to let in the cool night air when I heard faint talking. It was coming from next door. At first, I thought it was just someone walking by. The voices had this odd, rhythmic quality. It didn't sound like normal conversation, more like chanting, almost in a language I couldn't place. It was soothing in a way that felt wrong. I told myself it was late, probably just some night owls. I rolled over, trying to push it out of my mind. The next night, it happened again, louder this time. I got out of bed and stood by the window, peering through the blinds. Their yard was dark, just the faint glow of a streetlight catching the edges of their overgrown lawn. I couldn't see anyone. Just those voices, that strange staccato rhythm that made my skin crawl. I watched and waited. Nothing revealed itself. Eventually, the voices faded, and the night went quiet again. After that, the voices became a regular thing. Not every night, and never at the same time. Sometimes they were soft, like a murmur in the wind. Other times they were loud and urgent, always with that same unnerving rhythm. I thought about going over, knocking on the door. Every time I worked up the nerve, something stopped me. The thought of those voices, that house, it filled me with this creeping dread I couldn't shake. I didn't want to know what was happening over there. I didn't want to get involved. Then, one night, the voices came right up to my window. It was past midnight, and I was half asleep when I heard a low hum. Not the voices this time, but a muttering sound, like someone was standing just outside. I froze, straining to listen. My heart pounded in my chest. I crept to the window, barely daring to breathe. The yard was dark, as always, no sign of anyone. The hum was unmistakable, low and garbled, like something just out of reach. I wanted to look, really look. Fear held me in place. Something told me that whatever was out there, I didn't want to see it. I backed away, returning to bed with my heart still racing, pulling the covers up like a child afraid of the dark. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, everything was normal. People walked their dogs, waved hello, kids played in the street. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd heard. The hum, those voices, whatever was going on next door, it wasn't just odd neighbors who kept to themselves. Something was wrong. I could feel it.